Coming into our kitchen conversations. It looks like our Facebook friends are starting to join us. It is a windy and beautiful day here in the Pacific Northwest, and I am very excited about our show today. We have Paul Roberts with us, and Paul has an amazing resume. I'm going to tell you a couple of his current titles. Paul's a current Everett City Councilman. He also is the Vice Chair of Sound Transit and the Chair of the Puget Sound Clean Energy Agency. And I tell you, all those hats, they really do intersect in really important ways. And that's why I've invited Paul on today to talk with us about transportation and really the climate. I also have to mention, Paul, that you are a former school board director for the Everett School District. And so that's kind of near and dear to my heart. But welcome, Paul, to Kitchen Conversations.
Well, April, thank you for having me. And lest I forget, thank you for the work you're doing for our kids, because the school board work is just the very best. I can
Absolutely.
remember how much fun it was to go to graduations. I didn't realize until I started my first year. And then I realized, oh my gosh, this is fun. And it's the most exciting thing. So that's really great work. And thanks for doing that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here. And I know the folks that you're representing, or that all the different hats that you're wearing in the community. Did you want to say a little bit about that and some of that work?
Yeah, thank you. Let me speak to that. So yeah, I do wear a lot of hats. I'm sort of like a walking millinery store with all these hats. But so yes, I'm on the Everett City Council. I am the chair of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency Board, which covers the 4 county regions of Snohomish, King, Kitsap, and Pierce. And then I'm vice chair of the Sound Transit Board, which covers the 3 county region on part of the Puget Sound region. I do consulting work in environment and economics and policy, and have for a number of years. But I'm here as an individual. I'm not here representing any of those boards or organizations. So the comments that I make today are really my own and not on behalf of any of those entities. Because I don't, those are decisions. I've long since known, and you do this with the school board, we don't speak for the board. And yes. I'm not speaking for those agencies today, but I'm sure happy to bring whatever expertise I can to these issues. So thanks for
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and thank you for that, because that's very true. It's always, I always say, the boards and committees we sit on, they're team sports. And so we're just individuals on those amazing teams. Well, Gal, let's just jump into it and talk about the climate a little bit, just to start things off. And there are so many areas that we need to improve our transportation infrastructure just to make it less harmful for our environment, right? So that intersection between the climate and transportation. And I'm thinking of examples like the 2018 Supreme Court case that we had that really protected our salmon, and that really affected the road design and our culverts. We've got these incredible surroundings in our state, and while our jobs and schools and they attract more people here, what can we do to protect the resources and the environment as it relates to transportation?
Well, it's a great question. So, and I want to put this question in a really sort of a context for all of the other questions that follow. But I've been a student of this since the 70s, and the data that we've had on these issues has not only have we known for many years that greenhouse gases were impacting our climate, but the data has gotten better and consistent in terms of the basic theories. It's no longer a question, it's decided science. Yeah. And so let me give you a sense, a perspective. And this largely comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is sort of the gold standard of thousands of scientists around the globe. They published a study in 2018 that was intended to really give us a clear focus. And to put that in perspective, what we know today is that the climate has warmed by, on average, 1 degree Celsius. In that time, we are seeing now dramatically, as we just finished dealing with fires and smoke, we are seeing a dramatic increase in the frequency, in the intensity, and in the severity of event, of what we call climate influenced events. So those fires, floods, storms, rain events, droughts, but increased frequency, increased intensity, which is the way we measure these kinds of events, and severity is the economic impact. We will find a vaccine for COVID. We will move forward, but we will not find a vaccine for the Earth's temperature. The number one task is to reduce fossil fuels and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that means it has huge impacts for transportation. It has huge impacts for our economy. We need to build a clean energy economy. And those are the hard realities. The good news side of this is we here in Washington State, and in particular Snohomish County, are really well positioned to build that economy that we need. That's clean energy, water, agriculture, forestry, building materials, transportation. We have a lot of deep roots here. Absolutely. So when we think of transportation, we really need to think, how will that new economy be built? And how can we use and translate that and transfer that to clean energy?
I love that, and I think it's really true. Just to emphasize the point you just made, that we can get a vaccine for COVID, but we can't. There's no quick fix. There's no shot that you can take to bring back our climate, to go backwards. And so I think we have to be mindful of that as we're talking about our economy and moving forward. And so I think one of the things that came up in one of my town halls that I thought was interesting as we're talking about this is that, we've got a lot of jobs now that are being done at home. And should we be incentivizing employers to permanently, offer work from home solutions? Because again, that will affect transportation, that'll affect congestion, and honestly, it would affect the environment. So, should we be incentivizing those employers to have folks work from home even post COVID?
Well, first of all, it's a great question and a great issue. I guess there's probably a debatable points in that regard. But what I'm seeing, and it's very much an evolving issue now, but what I'm seeing is I don't know that we need to incentivize it so much as we need to track what's actually happening. That is,
that's a good point.
The private sector is making these decisions. We happen to be in a part of the world where we have tons of really, really bright technology people. And so between here and California are probably two of the biggest centers on the planet in terms of internet communication technologies, artificial intelligence technologies. And we've all seen an explosion in the platforms upon which we're dealing with right now. I mean,
exactly, like our Zoom platform. Exactly.
And so the private sector is actually responding very well, I think, in
that's a good point.
In this. And the real interest and issue for, at least for me as I'm studying this, is what will happen with real estate, what will happen with commercial real estate,
that's good,
with the way we do business and jobs. Some jobs will have to be place bound, others not. And so I think that we will continue to see this evolve, certainly over the next couple of years, but I don't think we'll go back to the way things were before. I wish I knew what they will look like, but I don't think, I think they'll look differently.
Well, and that's a good point. And since we're talking about jobs, so is there a climate conscious way to offer a chance to create new jobs, new green jobs around the state? If we're looking at, so we've got jobs that are now being done in a new way, but now if we're looking at new jobs, is there a way to really create those new green climate conscious jobs around our state?
Yes. And I think it's there's some real exciting possibilities. So let's just take a couple of those real quickly. First, let's talk about energy. And if we look at it from the standpoint of trying to reverse trends that are harmful, probably the most important thing we can do is put a price on carbon. Now,
Yes.
the rest of the world has figured this out and we're still struggling.
Yeah, the carbon tax, we got to get there. We have to get there.
And I call it a carbon fee because the emissions from burning carbon are the poison that's poisoning the planet. So it's not, to me, it's not a tax from an economics point of view, it's a fee. We're trying to recapture the external costs. We call it externalizing, and sorry to be wonky, but I'm
no, I love that. I'm taking notes. I don't know about our viewers at home, but I'm taking notes, Paul.
So when we burn fossil fuel, as one example, and there are others, but the emissions go into the atmosphere. We don't pay for those, but we pay for them externally because the cost of storm events, the cost of flooding, the cost of pollution, that's now borne by the broader community. And so we call that in economics externalizing the cost. So to me, this is a way of recapturing some of those costs. And so we need to put a price on carbon. Europe has done this, Asia has done this, other modern nations have done this, and they're doing more of it. In the West Coast of the United States, California, Oregon, and British Columbia have all taken steps in this regard. Washington has not yet done so. So that's number one. Number two is looking at new clean energy forms of transportation, looking at clean energy forms for buildings. Building and transportation are the greatest generators. So we have brilliant thinkers here with technology and Microsoft and Google and Amazon and others. You know, they are developing the technologies that will help us deal with these issues. The other ones are those issues that are going to be driven economically around the globe, such as water. So, you know, I published a study a couple of years ago now that looked at water, it looked at energy, water, agriculture, forestry, and building materials. Those are all sectors that we have a strength, historic strength in this state. And we found in each of those cases, there are real opportunities and there are markets globally for the research and development and for new product development. So the idea of a green economy is to build that. And the other is infrastructure. We are going to have to rebuild a lot of infrastructure over the course of the next 20 years to deal with water, storm events, sea level, and transportation, which will be impacted by those events. As we do that, we need to build smarter, greener infrastructure. And so there are real opportunities here.
Well, and it sounds like we're in a great position.
Well, I'm thinking about it. One of the ones that started to emerge globally, but now here locally, is cross-laminated timber, which is a building material that is much, much greener and allows us to build structures differently and more intense development. So, and that's right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And again, you know, learning, part of these kitchen conversations is about learning. And so folks at home can learn, I can learn. And I will tell you, I've never heard of cross-laminated timber. So that is something, and I think, so what I'm getting from you is that we've got opportunities, right? We've got opportunities because geographically, and also just the type of, just where we are in terms of our environment, our natural environment in our state, it sounds like we've got amazing opportunities to be on the forefront with some of the development, like you were saying, R&D, when it comes to moving the ball ahead on clean jobs and a clean economy. So I want to take that, you know, take that to heart as I'm going to Olympia and hopefully making decisions that can affect that new clean, green economy. And kind of going, you know, sticking on the jobs factor, a lot of folks are thinking about, you know, we're looking at the commute during this pandemic. We know that there's income inequality. Higher income residents have tended to transition more easily to this remote work and this remote work environment. But folks that were considered essential frontline workers are folks like in our service, manufacturing, grocery store workers. They haven't had that opportunity. And as we see, poor individuals, they have to take our public transportation. They are taking it, and it is a little bit more risky because of the virus. In the short term, transportation wise, and I feel like all of this does. I'm glad we started with the environment. It all goes back to our environment. But how do we mitigate this disparity? Like, if you have some thoughts on that?
Well, again, great question. So one of the areas that I do work with Sound Transit is I chair what's called the Ridership Experience and Operations Committee. And
okay,
that's a fancy way of saying the stuff that's actually happening now, not
the user experience.
That's right. That's right. And so one of the things that we track carefully is ridership. And of course, during the pandemic, ridership has just tanked. I mean, we've just had huge reductions. But one of the aspects of that is looking at where it's still higher than some other places. And not surprisingly, very much to your question, where we see the ridership still being higher, relatively speaking, is in Everett, South King County, International District. Those areas where we know we have a higher concentration of low-income people. So we know this is their only way to get around.
The only way to go.
That's exactly right. And so we know that there are some real equity issues here. So one of the things that we've been doing at Sound Transit, but I know this is true for all the transit agencies, they're trying to determine what are the best health practices to keep those coaches and trains and so on clean and distancing and asking people to wear masks and doing the things that we know that those things work. We know they work. Absolutely. So we can do a lot to make these systems safer. And of course, as we come out of this, having that capacity there is really important. So we all have some really tough decisions to make because ridership has gone down, revenue has gone down, but the need to get those first line responders, they can't work from home. We need to help them get to work, and that's their only way of really functioning. And so we're just trying to do the very best we can to give to make that service available to them.
And that's really good to hear. And it's really good to hear that as an organization that you are looking at that specifically, because I think sometimes it feels like the disparities aren't seen and are they being paid attention to. So it's good that you're that those committees are existing within Sound Transit and other agencies that are looking at it, because we have to identify them so that we can fix them. So before we move on to our next question, we have one from our Facebook audience that I thought I'd pitch out to you. And so one of our viewers wants to know, would cap and trade just lead to large corporations buying up all the carbon credits from smaller companies, leading to the large corps not transitioning to lower carbon options? So kind of a detailed question, but is that one that you feel comfortable answering?
Well, I can answer it in part. I mean, I have a bias, and it is not in favor of cap and trade, but there's sort of an order of priority here. The first priority is to price carbon, and there's more than one way to do that. A well-managed cap and trade system will do that, and the real key is that this is a devil's in the details question. So how does that system work, and try to avoid situations where there's an inequity in the offsetting of those price mechanisms. But that's why, from my perspective, the best way is to provide a more basic carbon fee structure as opposed to cap and trade. But priority one is to price the carbon. So we have to sort of look at that, and that's a discussion that I'm hopeful that you'll be a part of soon.
Absolutely.
In the legislature, because I do think it will be on the table this year. I know that both the chairs of the House and Senate Transportation Committees have packages that include some kind of carbon pricing, carbon fee, or you can call it carbon tax, but I prefer the other it's going to happen in terms
Yeah.
of discussion. I don't know what the legislature will do, but I do know it'll be on the table.
Well, and I'm hoping that we can move, that we can get it across the finish line this time. And I like the way you put it, a carbon fee. And I think, and thank you for that question, because I think that that gets to the nuance of what we're talking about. So these aren't simple decisions. They aren't just, they're not taglines, if you will. And I think by me understanding, the difference between calling it a fee and calling it a tax, right? And so that we can really dig into the nuance of how that fee is structured. So that's structured in a way that we don't have issues like the one that was pointed out in the question. So yeah, you can absolutely count on me to pick your brain, Paul, because I will be doing that. And I love some of the white papers that you've been a part of putting together about, not just carbon fees, but also, our next step in our green economy, because that's really, really important. So thank you for that. And if anyone else has questions, definitely put them into our Facebook chat. We'd love to get to them. So another question, just to kind of talk a little bit more about specific transportation projects. The 44th is all about transportation, and we've seen ongoing construction on light rail. And here in the 44th, we are dealing with inadequacies on the Highway 2 trestle every day, but with shortfalls looming, we're just kind of facing the fact that transit might be operating at reduced capacity. And so how do we justify long-term commitments, dollar commitments into these projects when we've got reduced capacity, in terms of ridership?
Well, once again, right on point. And your district is so involved in transportation, and really,
Yeah.
I could go on, but your people know this better than I do. But as the legislature approaches this issue, first, in terms of the big projects, there are several mega projects that are going to be front and center. One of them is the US 2 trestle.
Yeah.
And so that is a big, that's, I think, on people's radar now. And in fact, I spent a fair amount of this morning in meetings talking about what will come before the legislature on that subject.
Oh, awesome.
Secondly is the Columbia River crossing. So the bridge between Vancouver and Portland. And that's a mega project. And the third, which has emerged, is the West Seattle Bridge.
Yes.
So these are all going to be big projects. The challenge that we all have, and of course you as a legislator will have, is that COVID has impacted the gas tax budget, the transportation budget, in big, big ways. The other pieces that are important are the culverts, which are the federal court order to for budget from car tabs.
Yeah.
And so, you put all these two things together, and it's a tough order.
It's not pretty.
But I do think that one of the opportunities is to look at carbon pricing as a revenue source that helps us get at these projects. And when we talk about a clean economy and clean transportation, we're not talking about no transportation, and we're not talking about no roads. I mean, Highway 9 is a huge problem in your district, and it will remain a huge problem, and it needs attention. So we're talking about a way of bringing all of these pieces together, but do it in a cleaner way. But I think, these are tough. These are tough decisions, and I hope that we can find our way forward to address what are called the next increment of projects.
Absolutely. And I think, and for me, one question that I get from constituents a lot is, what's the benefit? What's the economic benefit from investing in transportation? Because and I get it, folks, it's dollars. And again, dollars during a pandemic, dollars when it seems like, well, we could be spending this on something else. The reality is, right, that it's separate than the general fund budget. But I guess, what would you tell someone who said, what's the benefit of investing in transportation? And is there a cost to waiting? Is there a cost to kind of saying, we'll get to it later?
It's again, great question. There are huge benefits. I was involved in my world in aerospace for many years, and I actually did the public sector, all of the public sector work on aerospace for 777 and 87.
Oh, nice.
and we have to think in terms of moving people and goods.
Mhm.
And if we can't do that, the economy is crippled. And when that
Mhm.
happens, everything else is also
Yeah, it's
is
all impacted.
it does. It works as a system. So we have to think about ways to
Mhm.
efficiently move people and goods. And
Mhm.
I think forgot the other part of your question, but
And just is there a cost of waiting? Like is there kind of is there a downside to waiting and pushing this off?
there is. We call it in economics terms, we call it the time value of money. So
Mm-hmm.
everything gets more expensive to some greater or lesser degree as you go out in time.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that you can fund something now, you actually have an economic benefit to doing so.
Got it.
Um, so yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense. And so another one from one of our Facebook viewers, I will pop this in here and thank you guys so much for chiming in. This viewer says, thank you for talking on this issue. We must support the clean energy economy that is defining this century and proving successful in other countries. Will you support legislation that sets an end date for gas-powered vehicles and prohibits state funding of gas-powered vehicles? And this is from Bill Truitt, who is a member of the Snohomish chapter of the Climate Reality Project. I know it's probably more for me, right, than you asking what my legislative, but I'm going to kind of turn it around because there has been talk, you know, we see in California where they did pass legislation on an end date. I guess from your perspective, being a leader in this space, Paul, like what are your thoughts of legislation like that on setting end dates for gas-powered vehicles and prohibiting state funds for gas-powered vehicles?
Well, first of all, I think it needs to be on the table. I don't think that we can. I think
Yeah.
I guess the way I would put it is you will be dealing with the laws that affect human beings.
Yeah.
But laws of nature don't need a police force. The
Mm.
laws of chemistry and physics and math are going to apply.
Yeah.
We're not, there are no easy solutions here. So I think those issues need to be on the table. But my personal belief is that the first thing is to get the pricing, to price the poison. I call it price the poison that's poisoning the planet. When you do that,
I like that.
you,
Mm-hmm.
you disincentivize those things which are harmful and you incentivize those things which are not. And
Mm-hmm.
incentivizing clean economic development will come from that. Now, I do think all things need to be on the table. I think we're really past the point, you know, we're worse off because we have chosen to ignore
Yep.
the realities. And so I don't think we can afford to ignore options, but I do think that we have some options that are readily available to us
Absolutely.
and others that are less so, but we need to take the low-hanging fruit right now.
Yeah. No, and thank you for that answer because I think and if you watch enough of my shows, you know, I always come out with a mantra. Like I always guests always end up saying something with a mantra. And so I think the mantra from this show is going to be price the poison. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. And Bill, to your question, I don't want to skirt it, but I will say that I am in favor of a carbon tax, and I am in favor of getting there. And I think part of it that really pains me is that we're so far behind, even in that conversation on the West Coast, right? We've got our sister states who are far beyond us in that, and so I want to get us there. And I do support Governor Inslee's. I think he did set an end date for gas-powered vehicles, state vehicles, or at least he suggested one. And so that is definitely something I support. And I think we to your point, Paul, everything has to be on the table because this is a climate emergency. It went from a crisis to an emergency. And so we've got to put really everything on the table. And so thank you for that question. Because I think as we move into this next session, we can't forget about these important issues. We can't be laser focused on we can't be laser focused on the public health crisis and forget everything else because I think it all connects truly. And I guess, you know, just lastly, because we both have this passion for education, you know, education's been kind of central to our public service. And so there's been kind of a complicated history between education and transportation. And so do you see any opportunities to use transportation to reform educational inequities, or just, what do you see as a role for transportation in education?
That's an interesting question, because the whole relationship of transportation to education is very place bound. That is to say, it's very different depending on which school district are you talking about, and how might transportation help make it more or less efficient. But I do think there's an important aspect of this to help educate our children about the importance of transportation in terms of clean energy. I think we have a real opportunity to do that. And so I think they're sort of both in the classroom and getting to and from the classroom. And they're two different issues, but they do sort of come together on this. And by the way, I spent a lot of time working on what we call bus changeouts to get cleaner diesel engines and just simply cleaner air quality for our students throughout the state. Well, in this case, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency in the 3-county region, but it's become an issue that is really statewide.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. It's when we talk about transportation and education, they are so connected. And I think there's really an opportunity that we might be missing. I would love to see all of our K-12 kiddos have ORCA cards, much like our university system, and really getting them used to using public transportation at a young age, because I think that habit will stick with them as they get older and see that as a viable option for getting from point A to point B in a very economical way. So I would be an advocate of that for sure.
Great point. I really agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it looks like we're at the end of our time. This has been an absolute great conversation, Paul. I'm so excited that we were able to talk about transportation, especially as it relates to our climate. But I feel like this is going to be the first of many, because we could really go on. We could go on much longer, because this is a deep issue. It's an issue with a lot of different tentacles, and I think it's important, and it's a climate emergency. So honestly, we have to keep this at the top of our priority list.
We really do. Well, April, thank you so much. Thanks to those who asked questions. They were great questions. And
absolutely.
Anything I can do to help you, I'm all in. You're just a great public servant, and thanks for what you're doing for our kids too.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, and thank everyone at home for watching Kitchen Conversations today. Don't forget to tune in next week for a fantastic show. We'll be talking about healthcare in some different ways, and some new ways that you might not have thought of before. So again, thank you to everyone at home, and thanks, Paul, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, April.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.